So yeah, cool. Now it's good to be back. I had a good time with everybody last week, and I'm excited. Before we even get into it, you guys, I mentioned Abby last week. That's my girlfriend's daughter. She passed her driver's test today, so we're excited about that. And she drove me here in the rain, so double excited about that. So, so that's awesome. You're going to notice as we go through the slides that they look different because these are slides I used from something else I did. So I didn't make them look all nice and pretty with the same theme, but it's okay because the information's good. This week probably be a little more interaction than last week. And the first question I want to ask for anybody who wants to share an answer is, what have you so far, what is the hardest part of being a parent?
Letting them grow up.
Letting them grow up.
Treading new waters. It's not the same when I was a kid.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And just so I'm curious, like, with the group here, kids, how many of us, our kids are like preschool or younger? Elementary, middle school, high school, grown up? All right. Cool. Just to kind of give me an idea of what we're working with here. But yeah, so well, I mean, so what's your answer then? They're grown up. What's the hardest part of being a parent?
Me, staying out of their business and letting them make their own mistakes versus me still trying to parent like they don't want.
Yeah, so especially when they're older, staying out of the way and letting them make grown-up decisions and then also face grown-up consequences of those decisions is really hard, for sure. So one of the things I want to tell you, everybody here, just by the fact that you're here and you're interested in being part of this conversation, you're doing a better job at being a parent than you probably feel like sometimes. In fact, I'm pretty sure most parents are always doing a better job than they think they are. Not, of course, are there some who are not? Sure. But in general, when you have that struggle of, man, am I doing a good job? Just by the fact that you ask the questions, you pray the prayers, you ask your friends or your pastor for advice, or however you manage that stuff, you're doing better than you think you are. I promise you that. Raising children is like the ultimate puzzle that God gives us. The minute you think you have it figured out, you then find out you don't have it figured out at all. And it is probably those of you with kids, which is all, I actually don't have any kids, which makes it kind of interesting for me to have these conversations. So all my experience is just based on working with people. But those of you with kids know that it is like both probably been your deepest joy, but also your like deepest anxiety, all wrapped in one. So we parent right now in a crazy world. I know it's kind of always been the thing that when we grow up and we look at the younger, oh, you guys, didn't have it the way I had it and all that kind of stuff. But like objectively, this is a crazy time to raise kids. We live in a very media saturated world. We live in a very technology driven world. And those are all, or both can be very big blessings, but they also present challenges that our parents, or some of you guys who are a little ahead of the game with older children, like some of the things parents mess with now, you didn't have to consider, or your parents didn't have to consider. Like the basic things, kind of like we said last week, how there's nothing new under the sun. In broad terms, there is nothing new under the sun. Peer pressure is still a thing. Temptation is still a thing. Responsibility, rebellion, those are all still things. But the means by which kids and teenagers can get involved with that stuff is just more complex and complicated. But like I said, you guys are doing better than you think you are. I promise you that. And I say that because I know in those darker moments, you probably second guess or have had those moments. And any parent who's being honest with you has had those moments where they have wondered, if I'm doing a good job, could I have done this better, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk for a second about what the role of a parent is. And again, question to the floor. What do you think your job is as a parent? So I know I did a good job as a parent if what? You don't have to have the right answers. I'm just curious what you think.
When I produce a responsible adult.
Great. When I produce a responsible adult.
I think parents are patterns.
Say that?
Parents are patterns. You can say all you want, but you gotta walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Okay, so when I set the example, I'm being a good parent, not just when I'm talking at them or.
Right.
Okay. Any other thoughts? What's your job as a parent, or how do you know when you've been a good parent?
That's when you see your kid respond to something the way you hope they had.
Yeah, great. There's not a one size fits all answer to that, but I think every family has the responsibility to sit down, whether you're a married couple, a single parent, or some sort of mixed family situation, whatever your family unit looks like. We have the responsibility to sit down as the adults and kind of really search each other's soul, like, what are our values that determine that we're successful parents? We do know that Proverbs 22 verse 6 tells us that if you start children off the way they should go, even when they are old, they will not turn from it. That's probably a verse that can give parents great comfort, but also great anxieties, because it's very nice and comforting to know that if I do right by my kids, they will not turn from it. But then some of us look at our kids and we're like, I don't know, it looked like they turned from it. Like, what happened here? By the way the Bible is translated from old languages into English, this is not necessarily the perfect translation. A better way to think about this is start children off the way they should go, and when they are old, that knowledge will not leave them. Meaning, like, it's in there somewhere. And I know, again, those of you with the older kids, look at some of the things even if they're great kids, I mean, you don't have to be like a knuckleheaded kid to still have given your parents some anxiety once in a while. The good kids do it. All the kids do it. I mean, my mom can tell you stories for stories, and I think I've been a pretty decent person the majority of my life. But that's one of the things, as I think about that, around the question of how do I know I'm doing my job as a parent, is, am I starting them off and pointing them in the way they should go? And one of you guys kind of articulated, like, if I raise a responsible adult. I think that broadly, that's the correct answer to the question, is my job as a parent is to prepare my child to be a healthy, happy, responsible adult. The reason that is so important, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would add God-loving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
I mean, that's what churchy, but
No, that definitely falls into where, every family will have their value system for sure. But yeah, like that, and that's why it's important, again, for the adults who are raising kids to say, hey, here are our values. But the reason that definition is important is because that guides how we treat our children, to know, like, the end result is. That's actually a principle that's helpful for almost everything we do. If we're making moves or serious plans, we have to know where we want to go. Like, for example, even our drive over here. So I live in Virginia Beach. It's about a 45-minute drive. I'm not super familiar with this area. And my friend Abby here was driving me. She not super familiar with this area. Are you? Nope. So we had to pull out the GPS, make sure we knew where we were going, and then from there we have a path. When we first have kids, no matter how prepared we are, there are just things we don't know how to plan and prepare for. So I do want to make sure there's room for grace with all of this. But that's why it's important to say, how do I know I'm doing a good job as a parent? It's because I have this destination, and I can assess, like, are the decisions, the behaviors, the way I'm talking, et cetera, are they pushing me closer to that or further away from that? A good parent-child relationship is one that's going to nurture the physical, emotional, and social development of the child. And that's basically a fancy way of saying all the things you need to be a responsible adult. Your physical, emotional, and social, and spiritual as well. So The other thing we tend to notice, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this, there's often a pendulum swing in parenting. So my parents parented this way, so I go all the way over here in how I do it. Some of us pendulum swing, and then some of us follow the exact same pattern of for better or for worse. There's that pendulum swing of my parents did it this way, so I don't like what they did, so I go over here. Or that's the only way I know, so I go with it. I want you to know that no matter where you land on that, it's perfectly normal to have that back and forth. But so it's important to know what your end goal is as a parent and how you have a measurement of success, and recognizing that the things that we see in our parents and as we look back on our childhood and teenage years, they're going to kind of creep their way in as well. Talk for a second about what it's like to build a safe relationship. This is probably the core of how you find peace in this process with raising and parenting kids, is knowing how to have a safe relationship. Now, when I say safe, I don't just mean protection from physical danger. I mean a relationship where they are emotionally safe, or they feel like they can talk to you, or they know that you have their best interest at heart. And I know that at certain years that seems maybe more idealistic than reality, but that's what we aim for, is having safe relationships. So based on that, what are some traits that you all think are important to harbor a safe relationship with anybody? We don't even have to just think about children and teenagers for the sake of this question, but what's important in a relationship where you feel safe?
Open communication.
Open communication.
You have to listen to them.
Yeah, listening.
Honesty.
Honesty. Trust. All very good. All very good. So, like we just said a second ago, we may have different ideas of what makes us good parents, but if our goal is to get them to be fully functioning adults, they need to feel safe with us. Safe does not always mean they feel good. Safe does not always mean that it's fun, but rather that they're free to be themselves, to share their experiences without fear of not being loved. You never want to be in a scenario, if you can help it, where your child fears telling you something because they're scared that you will not care about them or love them anymore. There will be times where we're furious with them, we punish them, we ground them, we may even lose our temper sometimes, but we want our kids to always know that they're loved no matter what the conflict at hand is. So the reason that's important to highlight is we never withhold love no matter how frustrated we are. If we need to take a time out to get ourselves together, we take a time out to get ourselves together. I remember one time when I was, I think I was 12 years old, and I got in trouble for shoplifting. I stole a pack of baseball cards or something, I don't remember, something super inconsequential. But nonetheless, I got caught, and my dad had to come pick me up. And my dad is a very peaceful man. He's got a very patient spirit. And I remember, I don't think he said but 2 words to me: get in the car. Then when we got back to the apartment we were living in, he said, dinner is on the table, and then you're going to bed, and we're going to talk tomorrow. Terrified me. But as an adult, I look back and I'm like, there was a lot of wisdom in there. Because I think, and again, I don't have kids of my own, but I think my reaction might have been a little more wild than eat your dinner and go to bed. I think I might have had some colorful words and some high energy tones, but he knew that no matter how hurt or disappointed he was in my actions, that withholding love was not a good way to move forward with that. The other reason that that's so important, especially in the world we're living in now, is there's a lot of things that our kids explore, a lot of things that they're challenged by. Culture throws a lot of things out there. We see it, you can't watch anything online, on TV, anywhere, without seeing really like just diverse issues, controversial issues, and kids and teenagers will lean into that stuff and experiment with that stuff. Some of it makes us really uncomfortable. Some of it makes us really uncomfortable with what's going around these days. We have to be able to put that discomfort aside and never let that be, a reason to have our kids not feel loved. Now, that doesn't mean we don't challenge them. It doesn't mean we don't discipline and hold them accountable, but we cannot put our kids in a position where they have to worry about if mom and dad love them. When I think about those things, like, so I'm about 40 years old, and when I was coming up as a teenager, the big thing for us was like, even though I was like not cool, I was never cool, I'm still not cool. It was like your shoes, like your basketball. I didn't play basketball, but they're like Nike basketball shoes. Jordans were popular. There are a couple other, brands that were popular. And so that was a lot of what it was like for us is, you want to wear the right shoes to fit in, or you want to wear the right clothes or listen to the right music. But, now those pressures have escalated to things, everything just from like the gender identity stuff that's going on, of which there's some validity to all of that, but still kids lean in and they just kind of see what's going on in the culture and they want to do what seems fun, cool, interesting. And again, like I said earlier, some of that stuff really scares us as the adults, and we have to remember children are exploring. When your kid comes home and says, hey, like I really like this or I really like that, you have to remember like they're 12. They're not analyzing this with a mature grown-up brain the way you are. So remember the energy that they're coming at it. So let's talk for a second about what kids need to feel safe. And you guys highlighted some of this when we were asking the questions. But communication is key, but consistency in your communication is key. Now remember, we're talking about the ideals. Every one of us will mess some of these up. So if you hear me talk about this stuff and you're like, oh gosh, I don't do that perfectly, that's cool. None of us will, none of us do, but they're still the targets. Communication and consistency is key, and that involves getting on your child's level and getting into their space. Not like impeding into their space, but being present in their space. As I was kind of just talking about earlier, we have the tendency to analyze our kids' experiences through our grown-up brains with our grown-up wisdom and our grown-up maturity. And you have to remember, when you're talking to a 5-year-old, the 5-year-old has the wisdom and experience of a 5-year-old. When you're talking to a 10-year-old, they have the wisdom and experience of a 10-year-old. That translates even when you get into your adult children. If they're 25, they have the wisdom and experience of a 25-year-old. And so when we go into these conversations and we expect them to be able to understand our perspective, it's not going to happen. This always gets me when I work with teenagers at my practice. A lot of times I'll hear parents come in like, they don't know how good they have it. One day they're going to have to get a job and pay the bills. I'm like, you're right, they don't, because they're 14. 14-year-old doesn't know the stakes of having to pay the bills. 14-year-old doesn't understand those things, nor should they, because they're 14. Now, you can teach a 14-year-old and start to model that stuff for a 14-year-old, but don't you go as a 30, 40, 50-year-old adult and expect your teenager to understand how good they have it. They don't know how good they have it. They don't have the reference points in their brain that you have when you're making that statement. You can tell your kid you don't know how good you have it because you're able to compare to your experience or to other kids' experiences or whatever. They do not have that. And that's what I talk about, when we talk about like being on their level. Some of the ways that's helpful to get yourself there is just asking like where was my head at when I was whatever age we're dealing with. What are things I have done before this conversation that would help my kid understand what I'm talking about? Like, just to stay with that example, if I'm going to tell my 14-year-old, You don't understand how hard I work to pay the bills. No, they don't understand how hard you work to pay the bills. Have you been teaching them or, coaching them or preparing them for that stuff? Then maybe you can have a little bit of that conversation. But communication and consistency there is key. Be consistent. Like when we hold them to expectations, when we punish them, when we do whatever, let's be as consistent as we can, because kids get really confused if things aren't consistent. Mom, oh my gosh, like mom always hugs me when I come home from school, and she says she loves me and she's so glad I'm here. But I don't know, like today she was mad and I don't know what's going on. Like when you're a kid, that lack of consistency can get in the way. Now again, we don't hit that perfectly, but consistency is key, because again, we're talking about minds that have a limited level of development, wisdom, experience, again, depending on what age group we're talking about. Moving on from communication, like showing love, very broad, phrase there, but showing love to your kids is very important, especially the little ones. Being intentional about affection and human touch and saying things like I love you. There are a lot of studies out there, especially with young ladies, that say they learn how to interpret and put barriers and boundaries up with human touch by the relationship they had with their fathers or their father figure. So, when you have a strong father figure who provides good affection, that is teaching a daughter, like, hey, this is how safe touch is. This is how safe relationships go. I know a lot of us may not have always had the best example there, and some of our kids may not have had the best example there. But the idea is we model that. We model affection. We model healthy affection. We do communicate through our words that we love our kids. We say it often. It can be one of those things that feels arbitrary at times. Just, oh, I love you, all that. But again, you go back to the consistency of communication. If that kind of ebbs and flows, younger ones can get confused, older ones can get confused. I mean, really at any age that can get confusing. But when we show love, we are modeling for them what, good affection, love is like. And that sets them up for what they look for in friendships, what they look for in romantic partnerships, and all these other relationships. And it also helps build that safe relationship. If I'm giving my child a consistent message of I love you, if I'm giving my child a consistent message of affection with hugs and kisses, if that's appropriate for the age, then when we do have those moments where we're having to discipline or we're having to be strict or harsh for some reason, that is stacking on top of a track record of love and affection. And so we can weather that storm emotionally as a child. If we're not getting that love and affection, I'm not even saying like our parents are neglecting us or like they hate us or anything like that, but sometimes we get busy or we're just not intentional with our communication and our love and our affection. If a parent is kind of withdrawn in that way and then only pays attention when it's time to like, oh gosh, your report card is this, or I know what you did with your buddies last week, knock it off. Now my interaction with my parent is basically kind of whatever until they're mad at me. And then it's back to kind of whatever until they're mad at me again. But if in between those they're mad at me, disciplining me, there's consistent I love you, hugs, kisses, etc., then we weathered those storms more emotionally and the relationship with our parents is still safe. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm mumbling a little bit. So, but yeah, so we show love, we communicate, and then we engage with them. We actually engage in activities with them. Now, again, this is going to look different for every age group, but like we make time to play with our kids. And I know, like, if you're like me, it's like, when would we have time to do that? We work jobs, we go to classes, we have church activities, We have the other things that are part of our life. When the heck do I find time to play with my kids? And then when they get older, when do I find time? They don't even want to hang out with me. But we do all we can to have some sort of engagement. You know, that can be anything from sitting on the floor, 10 minutes of Legos. Even though some of us might hate it, it is hopping on that Xbox with them once in a while and not understanding what you are playing, but still having a moment with them. Another big one, especially if you have younger kids, middle school kids, and even high school kids, is eat meals together. Now, again, we're busy. I recognize that, you know, the dinner together every night is maybe from a little bit of a bygone era, but we can do that from time to time, once a week, couple times a week, where it's just like, hey, we can all take 30, 45 minutes, phones down, dinner, chit chat. Doesn't have to be super meaningful, like deep conversation, but it's just an opportunity for us to be anchored back to each other. And that actually stacks upon the consistency in communication, the opportunity to show love and affection because we have this intentional time together. If you have multiple children, and this would apply to adult children as well, is building a like individual rhythm for each child. So if you have, you know, a daughter, there might be things one-on-one with your daughter that could be special that your son would be like, I don't ever want to do that, and vice versa. You know, your son might want to go out and throw the ball around, and your daughter might want to go like walk the dog and play with the puppies or whatever. And it's okay. Lean into the individuality of your kids and set up things to do with them. Age appropriate, of course, and again, that actually translates well into adult children if we still have the connection and the relationship with them. Is lean in, have things in common with them. The other thing that does is it's especially if you have multiple kids, it can be difficult for each child to feel important or special, even if you're not doing anything wrong with that. That's again because we got little minds with little maturity and wisdom, and you know they may just feel like, oh, mom doesn't love me because she's hanging out with my brother right now, and back and forth. But again, if we're being intentional and we're building a rhythm with each of these kids, they're going to have that time. And then we can also build rhythms that we do as a family events. The key with all of this is, because it can be overwhelming, is just start small. Because what you just heard me say was make sure that you do things with your kids and that you're eating meals together and that you're spending time with each one of the kids. And some people would walk away like, well, Chris just told me to do the impossible because who has time for all that? And I get it. So you start small. I mean, it goes back to consistency and quality more than quantity. You know, a consistent rhythm of communication, affection, and activity engagement builds that bond and keeps that relationship safe. Yeah.
So, in a perfect world, in a laboratory, I call it, makes total sense. But in the real world, depending on the relationships, the consistency is great. I went through there, but if you do this with one kid and you do that with one kid, there's always going to be that sibling rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
He got to do that, she got to do that. What's a skill set? What skill set is needed to
Oh, well, I mean,
bring things back to the middle?
Yeah, I mean, that stuff is always going to adapt. I mean, you know, let's say, just using the examples, I say, hey, I'm going to play ball with your brother and we're going to walk the puppies with your sister. And the sister's like, I want to play ball. Well, maybe it's appropriate to like share and play ball, you know, and that could be the thing you do with your daughter if that's what she wants to. Like, the activity can change around, and we can do, like, it's not a hard science of we only do this with our son and we only do this with our daughter, but it is about like making sure they're each getting some time and activity with stuff that's important to them. And if that crosses over from time to time, that's okay. And then there's also a time to say, I know me and you can play ball tomorrow. This is time for me and your brother, just the same way that me and you take time And sometimes you just got to tell your kid and let them have their feelings and, I'm sorry you're sad. I'll come talk to you later when you're feeling better. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into some like discipline strategy stuff. But that's a great question. And that, to your point, a lot of what we're talking about is laboratory perfect world. These are the principles we strive for, even if we can't do them perfectly. But actually, yeah, that's the next point, actually, is setting expectations and boundaries, rules, and consequences. Part of that is, we're quick to correct our children or punish our children, but let's also be quick to affirm when they've done right. So when you do see that your son was nice and took his sister's dishes to the sink, hey, bud, I saw you take your sister's dishes, man. Thanks for doing that. You don't got to make a big dramatic moment out of it, but, just affirming when they do the right thing. I mean, think about it, as grown-ups. We like it when somebody says, hey, like, I really appreciate that you did the laundry, or, thanks for washing the car. I've been meaning to get to it, but man, it's been crazy. Same thing with kids, just affirm. When kids get praise, that's appropriate for doing the right thing. It teaches them that, oh, this makes mom and dad happy, and I like being praised, so I'm going to keep it up. Now, again, not perfectly, but again, we don't want the only communication our kids get from us to be the you're in trouble or hey, man, like, don't do that. We want the positive as much as we really want the positive way more because we're hoping there's not a lot of negativity to deal with. But we do want to lean into that balance. So acknowledge what they do right, not just what they do wrong. Make sure you're setting expectations when you're expecting things out of them. When you tell your kid, hey, like, go clean your room, they might not know what you mean by that. Now, plenty of times our kids are going to just screw around and, try to get out of cleaning their room. But sometimes they don't know what you're expecting, so you might have to, especially the younger they are, so you might have to say, hey, when I say clean your room, I mean, make sure all the laundry's in the hamper, make sure all your toys are in the toy box, make sure the bed is made. And it's okay, you have to give the expectations, because that's also your metric for, if you need to discipline, like, hey, like I told you, clothes, toys, and the bed, 2 out of 3, go knock the other one out, and then we can play, or then we can go get ice cream or whatever we're doing. But expectations and boundaries are huge, and I think what happens with a lot of parents is we know in our heads what we want to do. We're very busy, so we don't always give our kids the explanations or the grace to figure it out. And especially those of us who are prone to losing our temper may kind of yell at or discipline kids over things, and they get a little confused, right? So let's say your young child doesn't know what you mean by clean their room, and you say, oh gosh, it's been a busy day, I need you to go clean your room while I make dinner. And they go and they put the laundry in the basket, and they think they did the job. Now again, I know it's hard, sometimes kids try to be sneaky with us on stuff like that. If that kid comes down and you go check and you're like, oh, the bed isn't made and the toys aren't put away, and you just kind of like lean in with some harshness, like, oh, I told you to clean your room, what the heck are you doing? Like, now I gotta like help you and I gotta make dinner. And that kid is like confused because they really thought they did what they were supposed to do because there was never expectations laid out for them. That's probably one of the things I see a lot in families by the time they're in my office is, I'll get comments, and by the time they're in my office, there's probably a lot of distress at home and there's other factors going on. But I'll hear a lot of like, my kid just don't know how to act, or, I just need him to figure out. And like, my first question is, what have you been doing to explain that to him? And then, 50% of the time they're like, we'll go get another therapist. But that's a big question I have to ask is like, what have you been doing? And, sometimes they've worked really hard, and, sometimes their kid is just being a punk. Like, that is a part of it. But the boundaries and expectations are so important. And because the other thing you're doing with that is you're modeling for them on how to set boundaries and expectations as they grow into friendships. as they grow and have their own kids, as they get jobs, as they have responsibilities at school, all these things. So like with all of this stuff, right? Showing love and affection, communicating, engaging in activity, setting your expectations and boundaries. The key is going to be quality over quantity. So when you show love, we want consistency, but be intentional with how you do these things. You know, if you're like, oh, I spent an hour with my kid today, but you're like on your phone half the time, that's not the same as like 10 minutes of hands-on playing Legos with your kid. You know, if you're playing Xbox with your kid, but you're like, oh gosh, like what's going on? You know, I have to go like pick your sister up from, you know, I'd rather you be present for 10 minutes than distracted for an hour, upset for an hour. The quality is important with that stuff. Same thing with like the affection, you know, a heartfelt hug, kiss, kind word is, you know, better than a, you know, kind of half-made effort, or when there's any kind of harshness or like chip on your shoulder, like, okay, I had a hard day, come on, like, and there are some of us who talk to our kids that way, and it's not because we're bad parents, like, so we're tired, we have stuff going on, and these are, like I say, these aren't necessarily things we're going to do perfectly, but these are the things to keep in mind. Before I move on, are there any questions in that territory?
One thing I want to talk or just bring up, and we're at the far end of the spectrum here with our kids, 30 plus for the most part. But I will say to all the other parents in here, and some of you guys start, the setting boundaries and the importance of that, because it continues. We've seen it continues through life. Now the boundaries are different, but there still needs to be those boundaries set at each life stage is what we've encountered. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that or disagree.
No, I do. Actually, let me add a little bit on boundaries for a second. So boundaries and expectations go hand in hand. Probably one of the most classic scenarios I have that comes into my office where we're not talking about like high risk crisis level stuff is just simple, like my kid doesn't do his homework or my kid is mean to his sibling, and like when I talk to them they're just rude and they don't listen. So I'm like, cool, then we need a boundary. The boundary is kids who speak that way in my house do not have X, a tablet, a phone, whatever. And it's great to set that boundary, but then you have to hold that boundary or else your kids learn that you're full of it. And once your kids think you're full of it, you have lost. You will have to fight really hard to get that back. So let's say that happens. You know, your kid not been doing their homework, they're getting bad grades. So you say, hey, bud, like there is no more PlayStation until those grades are back up. And so that kid decides to throw a tantrum. And that kid decides, well, of course, you hate me. You've always hated me. And, you know, mom would let me play the PlayStation, all this stuff, to the point where you get frustrated, because that's frustrating. And let's be real, sometimes we're like, you don't even know how bad I want to just whoop you right now. Don't say that, but that's how we feel. The temptation, though, if we are tired, because we had a long day at work, maybe we got in a fight with our spouse this morning, and I don't have the time to deal with my kid's crap. So when the kid starts throwing a tantrum, the temptation is, you know what? Fine, just go play your PlayStation and leave me alone. Well, now the kid knows that you're the one who's full of crap, and they can have whatever they want. They just have to outlast you and push your buttons until you give in. And the more that happens, the harder it is to recalibrate. So when you set your boundaries, you have to stick to them. And if you're setting boundaries to correct course after not having set boundaries, you almost always have to expect the behaviors to get worse before they get better. Because if our kids aren't used to us setting those boundaries, they're going to test them. That's normal. You just have to, find some support. If you have a supportive spouse, a supportive collection of friends, those are the people you call. You say, my kid is driving me nuts. or behind closed doors with your spouse, be like, I just want to, oof. But in front of the kid, it's a very calm, like, dude, you seem really mad. I am so sorry that you decided not to do your homework. Let me know when you change your mind, and we can come back and talk about playing PlayStation. Easy for me to say sitting on this couch, hard to do in real life, but it's crucial, and here's why that's important. We talked at the beginning about how we're trying to set them up to be responsible adults. People who will not bend on their boundaries are their professors, their employers. So when they start to push those boundaries, there might be grace here and there depending on what's going on, but eventually an employer is like, yeah, you can't talk this way, go find a new job. Professor's like, yeah, I gave you one shot to do that homework, like, you're done, you failed, you're gonna have to take this class again. They will not have those same graces. So we prepare them for managing and understanding that people mean what they say and there's consequences for what they do. That's a whole topic I could spend like hours on, but I'm going to move into a little bit another dynamic that's really, really important is to be aware of your own stuff. I don't know if this is a great question for discussion with a small group, but I'll ask it anyways. You can share if you have an answer. But what do you feel like is, even if you don't want to answer out loud, think it to yourself. What has been your own personal struggle that has gotten in the way that you feel of being a good parent? We all have stuff. And one of the biggest threats to keeping that safe connection with our kid is letting our stuff get in the way. Think about this, piggybacking on what we were just talking about with like setting boundaries, expectations, and even disciplining. When you discipline your kid, are you disciplining out of anger, or are you disciplining to put them back on the path? Because discipline is meant to put you back on the path. Anger comes with it because we love our kids, and we can be hurt when they do things that we think are hard or destructive. But you know where anger really comes from? In fact, if you were here last week, we said anger is a form of dealing with an injustice, right? So when we're angry, we're really dealing with, I feel disrespected by my kid. That's where anger comes from most of the time. And when we respond with yelling and cursing and all the things that come along with anger, we're not actually trying to discipline. We are trying to assert power. We're trying to, you disrespected me, I'm going to disrespect you back. And then we lose the ability, or potentially lose the ability, to discipline them, which is putting them on the path. I'm not taking PlayStation away from you because I want your life to be miserable. Your grades suck, and I need you to get back on the right path. I'm not telling you not to go hang out with your friends because I don't want you to have fun. You and your friends are getting in a lot of trouble. Get on the right path. That's what discipline is for. Discipline is not for dealing with how we feel about what's going on with our kids. In fact, if you go back to what I was telling you about with my dad, I think that's exactly what he did. He knew that he had some anger, and that if he tried to engage with me, he was going to be more dealing with his feelings than actually trying to discipline and put me back on the right path. It is okay to have those feelings. It's just not okay to thrust them on your kid when you're trying to discipline. But that's when you call your spouse or you call your buddy. And, you know, maybe it's not great to say this in church, but like, curse with your friends. This kid, get it out. Like, deal with your emotions because you have been disrespected. But the point of discipline is not to deal with your feelings. It's to help get your kid back on the right path. And that's probably one of the things that I see that really does end up impacting, because now it's anytime I get in trouble, my dad just yells at me. And especially the younger we are, goes back to feeling like they don't love me. You know, like if I'm 5, 6, 10, it starts to make a little more sense once you're a teenager. But like, that's how I interpret being yelled at, is this person doesn't care about me. That's not true necessarily, but that's how a 10-year-old brain interprets that stuff. So Do you discipline to deal with your feelings, or are you disciplining to get them back on the right path? If you can't answer that question before you speak to your kids in a discipline moment, take a breath, take a break, figure it out. Very rarely do your kids need in the moment discipline. Now, don't get me wrong. I know sometimes we have situations where maybe they're being wild, someone's going to get hurt. By all means, do what you have to do to stabilize a really rough conflict or situation. But it's also okay for your kids to sit around and wonder, like, oh man, like dad usually like comes at me. Where did he go? Like, that might terrify them a little more than you yelling at them, to be honest. So I would say if you get nothing else out of this section, is just when it comes to that, your stuff. What stuff are you bringing? Am I offended by my kid? Am I dealing with my feelings by my kid? Kids are smart. Kids are resilient, and kids see us. So when it comes back to our stuff, what are they seeing in how we live? How we're modeling for them? Do they see you apologize when you've done something wrong? Again, because we all will do things. Maybe we'll talk disrespectful to our spouse, or we'll get frustrated at something and curse, or whatever it is. Do they see you apologize? Or do you apologize to them like, hey, buddy, like I really shouldn't have said that. That wasn't cool. Do you apologize when you've done wrong by them? Like, hey, I was really harsh with you the other day. I shouldn't have done that. That goes miles. So do they see you apologize? Do they see you prioritize important things? Because they're going to watch. It's cool, like, we're all here as church people, so it's cool to tell your kid, like, yeah, you got to go to church every Sunday or be in the youth group. Like, are you going? Probably you guys here are going most of the time just because you're here for this, but, other things like, modeling for your kids. Like, if you're trying to instill values, are they seeing those values played out in your life? Because they pay attention. And, yeah, dad says go to church, but like, when's the last time he went with us? They will notice that stuff. Do they see you being healthy, whatever that means for you? In the things you eat, the way you exercise. Do they see you drinking a lot? Do they see healthy communication between you and your friends, you and your spouse? Do they see you taking care of things around the house? Like, we tell you to clean your room, but like, dad, your office looks like a pigsty. Like, are they seeing you make healthy decisions? Are you modeling that? And then, especially in the way you treat people, do they see you being kind to your spouse, to your partner, to other kids, to other family members, to people in the community? Because you can tell them, hey, be polite to the other kids at school, but if they see you being rude and brash with their brother and sister all the time, telling them to be nice to the other kids at school is not going to go a long way. So, again, these are high marks, and there's no reason to beat yourself up if you're struggling with like, oh gosh, I haven't been good at this or that. Nobody does any of these things perfectly. And if you are at some point during this talk thinking like, oh gosh, I could do better here or there, awesome. Identify it, work on it. We all do the best that we know how to do. So that's another part of building a safe relationship, though, with your kid is making sure you have a handle on your stuff. Sometimes that could mean that you have to do some real work on yourself. Like if you came up in a place where parents did some damage to you, you got to go figure that out. And that can be as simple as talking with some friends about it, talking to your pastor about it. Maybe sometimes it's even appropriate to get some professional help about it. Especially, sure.
I'm that person.
Okay.
I grew up pretty much alone from a young age, and I have worked on myself.
Good.
I have gotten to a good place. But I find that's my stuff. I have talked about it with my daughter, which she is a teen and mature and understands, but I also have a 7-year-old boy who is very immature, very needy, and a mama's boy. But I find myself where growing up alone, that aloneness was instilled in me, and obviously I'm an introvert, but I need that alone time. Like
And that's hard when he wants to be on you all the time.
And I don't know how to express that to him because I've tried, but I don't know how to explain it at a 7-year-old level. But that's when he pushes the hardest, and that's when I find that I kind of get angry because I need this right now.
Yeah.
But you're hugging on me, and that's the part that hurts because it's usually like I want to snuggle or I don't want to say no to that, but I kind of need to at the moment.
Yeah, that's
How do you put that in kid terms?
yeah, that's tough. Trying to think of a quick answer, but we could unpack it a little bit afterwards if there's time. But
He has quiet time.
So you give him quiet time?
Yeah.
let's say
I'm
my,
putting mom in quiet time.
what yeah, one of the things that yeah, that's a good idea is just to again it's establishing some boundaries and expectations. And then at 7 years old, it might work to say, hey, like I really love our cuddle time. Tell you what, I'm kind of distressed. I'm a little cranky right now. You can say you're cranky, like you can use words like that and say, how about I take 15 minutes to get a little less cranky or whatever, you 20, 30, whatever. That way, like we can have like the best cuddles. And he might not get it right away, and sometimes you're gonna have to be maybe a little firm with like, buddy, I love you, but I need this time. And you can provide some activities, go watch an episode of whatever, or go play with your trains or whatever he's into. And then it's just being consistent with like, I'm gonna come, we're gonna cuddle, and he might be sad, and you say, I'm sorry you feel sad, buddy, but I love you. I'm coming back in a few minutes. And it's kind of like what I was saying a minute ago. When you set those boundaries, at first he's gonna push because he's not used to them. But once you get into a rhythm, it's gonna get a little easier and easier. That's a quick answer. That's something we could spend a lot of time talking about, but that's a quick answer. The other thing that I would think of, I don't know what's in your social life or bubble, but if you have friends, like have someone come over, hang out, and it's not as maybe a need like babysitting per se, but have a friend with the kid over and they have some time, and just other parents get it. If you tell one of your other parent friends, like, I just need like 20 minutes, like, can you guys just kind of come over and distract him for a minute? Can they do that for you every day? No, but they can do that once in a while. You would do that for somebody else if that was reasonable and you were able. So those are my gut answers. But it can also be a teaching moment to say like, hey, here's things that some people need. Sometimes some people need a minute.
I think he would get that.
Perfect. Give it a try and start slow. Like, you know what, bud? Mom needs 5 minutes. Because if you go, like, mom needs 30 minutes, that's going to drive him nuts. But start slow. Like, hey, man, mom needs like 5 minutes. And then give him a task. Like, hey, mom needs 5 minutes. How about you go whatever? And then in 5 minutes, we'll circle back and start there. Experiment with it. You deserve the time, but it's hard because you're responsible for a youngin'. It's normal to feel overwhelmed by that. So those moments where you feel like I'm crazy, you're not. You're normal. Perfectly normal.
That's what he does, and I don't want a fixer kid either.
Yeah. So not I'm feeling
My
bad.
daughter is that way, and I don't want, that's probably my fault, but yeah, that's
Or
something
maybe
I don't want.
do me a favor, I need you to go do this. We'll sit down for 5 minutes.
Yeah. So not necessarily I'm feeling bad, but I need. Right? I need 5 minutes. Because if he wants to help you, how does he help you? He gives you 5 minutes. But if it's I'm feeling bad, then you're right. He's gonna want to give you extra hugs. Because for him, a hug is comforting. So if a hug is comforting for him in his 7-year-old brain, a hug is going to be comforting for you, which it is most of the time, right? So good question. Normal struggle. You're not alone with that. Experiment with some of those ideas. You're going to be okay with it. But it, like I said, so it comes down to like really being aware of your stuff. When they get older, you can have more mature conversations about that stuff too. But if you're not sure how to do that and you have like really heavy stuff, that's definitely when you seek outside counsel, whether that's just a parent who's 10 or 20 years ahead of you and knows some things, a pastor, a therapist, counselor, whoever. It's totally okay to seek help and wisdom. In fact, it's no matter what your source, as long as it's a decent person, a decent source, like you should be seeking wisdom, like all the time. I'm in like a group text with like 4 of my best friends, of which one is your pastor, because we've all been friends from like high school, and most of those text messages are just knuckleheaded things that 5 grown-up dudes say to each other. But on occasion, it is, hey, my daughter is like doing this, or my son is doing this. And then once the rest of us realize this is not a time for sarcasm, we try to help each other. And it's a good thing. It's good to have parents you can talk to. It's good to have somebody who's not your spouse if you're married, not your partner if you're dating, even if they're great. It's always good to have outside wisdom. It's good to read, find some good books, some good blogs. We live in a day and age where you can find a podcast about anything to listen to while you're driving to work or while you're doing chores around the house. All kinds of good stuff. A really good book to read, I gotta see if I can remember the author's name. He wrote a whole set of books called Have a New Blank by Friday. So there's like Have a New Kid by Friday, Have a New Teen by Friday, Have a New Spouse by Friday, whatever. It's kind of a gimmicky title, but they really all rely on how to set boundaries and expectations in whatever kind of relationship. I think it's Dr. Lehman, Lehman. Little old school in some of his approach, which is not great for everybody, but it is one of those books, if you can read it and take the nuggets of wisdom you find in it, it's a really good book to read. And it is about setting those expectations and boundaries and having communication and walking through some of those trouble issues. So just to kind of review the territory that we've been in, and then we can do some more questions. And I apologize. I know my talk has been a little scattered. It's because I have way more notes than I have time. But we want to know our role as a parent. That's where this all starts. How do I know I'm a successful parent? Where am I trying to get my kids? And we all pretty much agreed it's some version of I want them to be a fully functioning adult. That guides how we interpret our decisions. So when they come home with the bad report card, my goal is to make them a fully functioning adult. That's going to guide how I handle that. You guys know we live in a day where some parents set the goal, and I don't judge them for it, I totally get it, of I want to be their best pal. I get it. I really do get it, because like conflict is hard. And again, maybe they're coming from a scenario where my mom and dad were just so hard on me. I don't want my kids to feel the way I felt some of you there. So I don't judge any of them for it. In fact, that can be a strength if it's part of the whole package, that can be a strength. But if that's your goal as a parent, then you're going to handle that situation differently. If I want my kid to think I'm their best friend when they come home with a bad report card, oh, that sucks, man. Good luck tomorrow. But if I want them to be successful, I'm going to, hey, man, like, the expectations, here's a consequence. But knowing your role and your goal as a parent is crucial. Then we talked about like a big way you achieve that is through building your safe relationships. So being consistent with your communication, showing love and affection at an age-appropriate level, modeling good behavior, showing them your priorities, engaging with them in activities. And then we talked about like how dealing with your stuff is important as well. Knowing your weaknesses, knowing your vulnerabilities, and addressing them. Because not only does that help you build those safe connections and get them where you want them to go, but I will tell you what, when a child sees their parent making an effort to deal with their stuff, that goes a long way. And they might not recognize it when they're younger, but you're going to see, hopefully, that when they get a little older, they can recognize, like, holy cow, you went through it, Mom, you went through it, Dad, and I saw how hard you worked, and I saw where you tried. Kids, at the end of the day, will come back and notice that stuff. Not to put you on the spot, but is that true, Abby? Do you remember how hard your mom has worked through some things?
Yep.
Right? Abby's 19 years old, so she's hitting that. I'm turning into a grown-up now, and I'm starting to get it. And they come back. They see the work. But if you don't do the work, then they're not going to see the work. So let me just leave you with the thought we started with. You're doing better than you think you are. I don't care if they're little. I don't care if they're like middle school, high school. I don't care if they're grown up. You're doing better than you think you are. Nobody is a perfect parent. We all have room to grow, and it's never too late. There may be things that we do have to deal with repercussions or consequences from, but it's never too late to get better. It's never too late to gain wisdom. It's never too late to make better decisions in how we deal with our kiddos. So I'll pray for us, and then we can do a few questions if you want to do. I kind of like, with like the size of this group, that it can be like a discussion instead of like me just having to make up stuff. But no, I like that we can have a talk as a group. So let me pray, and then we have, 15, 20 minutes. We can do some of that. By no means do you need to hang around if you don't want to. But let's pray. God, thank you for today. And I think my first and foremost ask would be that you just protect our kids, that you keep our kids safe, that you give our kids wisdom, that you give our kids strength. We know where we want them to go, but Father, we want ultimately for you to guide us and get us there. We trust you for wisdom. We trust you for counsel, and help us to see that and lean in. Father, if there are times where we feel or maybe even know that we have made mistakes with our kids, I just ask that you would take any guilt away, any shame away, and encourage us to making new decisions. Every day is a new day, Father. Your word says that our sins are as far as the east is from the west when we trust in you. And we ask you to make that true in our relationship with our kids, that any misgiving or any misstep we've made, that they will be as far as the east is from the west, because with every new day we strive to be better. For those of us who maybe didn't have the best model growing up, pray you would put people in our lives to help us get on track, put wisdom, whether it's through books, sermons, relationships, whatever that would be, put that wisdom in our life, and give us the humility to accept help where we need help, and the wisdom to seek counsel where we need counsel. As we prepare to go our different ways tonight, just pray you would keep us safe, and we give all these things to you in Jesus' name. Amen. So again.